In the beginning, there was Bitcoin, a permissionless, pseudonymous, global currency that could be transacted between individuals separated by any distance, at any time, done cheaply, done in minutes, done without need of a bank or any other third party. If the revolutionary nature of what I just said hasn't sunken in for you yet, I'll give you just a minute to let that happen. What gives Bitcoin its amazing powers is one piece of old technology, cryptography, combined with a novel consensus mechanism known as proof of work. And it is POW that allows Bitcoin to be global, trustless, and permissionless, while still remaining highly secure. In this episode, I'm going to talk about the logic behind POW, but I'm also going to talk about a potential pitfall. I'm going to tell you in no uncertain terms why this major pitfall may one day force an alternative. One potential alternative, of course, is called proof of stake, POS. I'm going to talk about how POS tries to solve the major pitfall of POW, but I'm also not going to mislead you. POS also has its own problems. I'm going to talk about those problems, and then I'm going to tell you how a project called Cardano attempts to solve them. In addition, I'm going to compare the Cardano solution to other popular solutions, such as that offered by Ethereum. This is the first chapter in a series I call ADA versus the World. Now, let me apologize in advance to those of you who already have a deep understanding of how Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies work, because I am going to start with the basics to build my case. I will do my best, though, if you just bear with me, to ultimately lead you to some really interesting new places, I hope. All taken together, I hope that this is going to form a more solid, more complete argument by sort of starting from the beginning. So, if that sounds good to you, do stay tuned. The problem that Bitcoin solves isn't small, or even very new. And the problem is essentially this: how can two parties who have no reason to trust each other exchange value? When using a direct medium of exchange, i.e. the barter system, there aren't many problems. If I hand you a gold coin or a length of rope that leads to a stubborn old nanny goat, you can be relatively sure about the value that you're accepting from me. That method of consensus has been around literally since the dawn of human civilization. Later, to make things a little more convenient, we issued currency. With bank or state-issued currencies, you don't have to trust me at all. You just have to trust the bank or the state. But is there a way for two people to exchange some kind of a currency without needing a third party to issue that currency? And with that hard no, it was, until the invention of Bitcoin, impossible for people to transact value over the internet without using several centralized third parties. Usually these parties consisted of a specific set of banks, in addition to a centralized service such as PayPal or Venmo or whatever. Bitcoin isn't just another service, though. It is literally an alternative form of currency, and it does away with the need for any of the other services. It is actually money created by and for the people. It's money that anyone in the world can generate on their own and then exchange with anyone else in the world without needing any kind of centralized service. That is power. And that's all made possible because of cryptography and a consensus mechanism called proof of work, or POW. Now, Bitcoin at its core is a distributed ledger. It's an accounting system that is maintained by computers that are distributed all over the world. And anyone in the world can spin up a computer, join the network, and use it to mine some of their very own Bitcoin. All you have to do to send me some Bitcoin is to transmit a request to the network and say how much you want to send me. But to make sure that you and only you can send me your Bitcoin, you have to sign your request with a private key that only you know. But if you send me some of your Bitcoin, how can I know that you're only sending it to me? Because Bitcoin is electronic, so what keeps you from making infinite copies of your Bitcoin and sending it to as many people as you want? Or in other words, how can I know that the Bitcoin you're sending me is real and not counterfeit? 3 little words: proof of work. Essentially, Bitcoin operates by producing blocks. Each block contains a set of transactions that tells us things like, like Alice sent zero point 0.3 Bitcoin to Bob, Ralph sent 0.9 Bitcoin to himself from Susie's account because he stole Susie's keys. That Ralph, when is he ever going to learn? So a block can't tell us if a key was stolen, but you get the idea. It records transactions. To keep the books honest, we make it cost something to produce a block. Really, what's happening on the Bitcoin network is that about every 10 minutes, an election is held, and the winner of that election gets to produce the next block. Now, you really want to win that election and produce that block, because if you do, you'll get what is known as the block reward, which is some amount of newly minted Bitcoin. Right now, that block reward is 12.5 Bitcoins. Over a long period of time, though, that reward will be cut in half again and again until it becomes basically nothing. Now, that's an important point, the fact that over time, mining will gradually produce less and less Bitcoin, and we're going to come back to that in just a minute. But like I said, we want to win that election. We want to win it so that we can produce a block and win the block reward. So how do we get votes in that election? Well, we use our computers to repeatedly guess the solution to a very difficult mathematical puzzle. Each guess that your computer makes is like a vote. The more computing power you have, the more guesses you can make, and the more guesses you make, the better your chance of winning the election. So what keeps Bitcoin honest is actually the randomness of the way that block producers are elected, and the high cost associated with winning those elections. So if you wanted to send me some fake Bitcoin, for example, it was estimated in 2018 that it would cost you about $1.4 billion. Now, if you have that kind of money to spend on mining Bitcoin, you're actually much better off just keeping all of those block rewards you're absolutely going to get, and just use the Bitcoin that you mine legitimately. Or in other words,
I'm going to spend all of my evil money to win millions of dollars worth of Bitcoin, and then I'll destroy the Bitcoin network and make all the Bitcoin worthless. And then I'll go and beg for lunch money in the streets of Cabo San Lucas.
said no one ever. But Bitcoin isn't without, in my opinion, one major pitfall. And to understand what that is, we need to go all the way back to bartering with gold coins. The thing about a gold coin is you only need to spend the money to mine that gold one time. With Bitcoin, you must continuously pay the miners to keep mining in perpetuity. Because if the miners stop mining, the network stops producing blocks. And if there aren't any new blocks, nobody can spend their Bitcoin. And if nobody can spend their Bitcoin, then all of Bitcoin is worthless. Take a minute to let that sink in. So Bitcoin is kind of like gold, except that it's like gold that you must keep paying for as long as you want to hold it. The idea that Bitcoin is free in that way, the idea you can just sort of stash some Bitcoin away somewhere and forget about it, and that it's always going to be there no matter what, is an illusion. The miners have to be paid forever. If we stop paying the miners, then all of the Bitcoin is gone, even the Bitcoin that was already mined. I first came across this idea while watching an interview on a show called Real Vision Finance, where they interviewed a guy named Roy Sebig. Now, Roy happens to hold a high position in one of the largest Bitcoin mining firms in North America, but he also owns a lot of gold. So for me, that made his opinion seem particularly relevant. I'll link to his interview in the description, and if you haven't watched it yet, you should definitely add that to your list of stuff that you need to watch. However, here I'm going to cut to a short clip from that interview because I think that Roy puts it really well himself.
So what are we talking about on an annual basis? What does it cost to actually run the Bitcoin network?
So I was very nice to Bitcoin in this exercise. All I did was calculate the amount of energy, because I always try to think about things thermodynamically. And so if you look at the latest hash rate of the network, it's about 65,000 petahashes. It would require 6,600 megawatts to keep that system going. 24/7, that results in about $7.5 billion a year of electricity at wholesale rates. So that's essentially the cost of electricity to society is $7.5 billion. Then you have to look at the mining rigs. It would require about 4 million mining rigs to run at 65,000 petahashes. So when you calculate the cost of the mining rigs, again, even if I'm being very nice to Bitcoin at $500, $600, you're talking about another $2 or $3 billion. And the mining rigs have generally lasted for 3 to 4 years. So I was extra nice to Bitcoin. I used a 6-year amortization schedule, depreciation schedule. And in that regard, you're looking at about $10 billion before you get into labor costs, rent costs, things like that. So that's your decay, that's your theta bleed in option parlance. And that $10 billion a year is owed to the miners by the owners of the coin. And so when you look at the coin, even today when it's valued at $13,000, that's about $220 billion of market value. You have a monetary system which is worth $220 billion that's costing about 4 to 5% a year just to perpetuate its own existence year over year. That to me is worse than any negative yielding bond, because it's telling you that the only way this works long term is for the price to keep rising.
Now add to that the fact that over time, like I said, the block reward is going to go down. So it remains to be seen if those miners are going to keep mining as their pay keeps getting cut in half about every 4 years. It may be that as the block reward approaches zero, a lot less power will actually go into mining Bitcoin, and so the network will become a lot easier to attack. The only way this doesn't happen is if the value of Bitcoin can increase enough to compensate. Or in other words, if the mining reward gets really small, that's okay, as long as a really small amount of Bitcoin becomes worth a whole lot of money. And by the way, even when the block reward goes to zero, miners will still be able to collect small transaction fees that are paid by users of the network. So yes, there will always be at least a small amount of Bitcoin that miners can earn. It's just a question of, how much will that small amount be worth? If it's still worth lots of dollars, then okay. Still, I don't know about you, but as a Bitcoin holder, for me at least, all of this is a little scary to think about. I got really comfortable with the idea that it wasn't costing anybody anything for me just to hold my Bitcoin. But that's not true. It's actually costing billions of dollars a year for me to just hold my Bitcoin. So what's one potential answer to this problem? Proof of stake. Why? Well, the votes in the Bitcoin election system must be continuously purchased at a very high cost. As we've illustrated, it is precisely this very high cost of producing blocks that gives Bitcoin its security. Proof of stake more closely replicates what you have with a real gold coin. Now hear me out. It doesn't replicate it perfectly, but it's true that in a proof of stake system, like Cardano, for instance, the value of the currency you have already purchased is what is used to win votes in the election system. Importantly, I said win votes, not buy votes. Your currency is never actually spent. All you have to do is stake it, and you can win votes over and over again in an indefinite number of future elections. So in the case of Cardano, you're staking a coin called ADA. So your ADA can actually just sit there doing nothing in particular, and based on the amount you're staking, you'll be assigned votes in the election system. Or in other words, if you want to be the equivalent of a miner in the Cardano proof of stake system, you buy your ADA one time only and you stake it indefinitely. You aren't going to pay continuously to upgrade your mining equipment so that it's faster so that you can keep up with your competition. You aren't going to pay for huge amounts of electricity. And the logic behind this is pretty simple. The more ADA you own, the more votes you get, so the more likely you are to win an election. And if you do own a lot of ADA, you are being incentivized to behave honestly, because the more ADA you own, the more you naturally want to protect the network that your precious ADA depends upon to survive, right?
No way! I want to buy $1 billion worth of ADA and then destroy the Cardano network so I can live in the streets of...
So it sounds like an open and shut case, right? We should just switch everything over to proof of stake and ride off into the sunset with our giant bags of ADA. Well, okay, not so fast. There are problems with proof of stake. To understand those problems, I'm going to rewind and talk about the way Bitcoin works just a little bit more. Now, in Bitcoin, you're producing these blocks at a high level of difficulty, processing difficulty, resource-wise. It consumes a lot of computational power to produce each block. The cool thing is, we can look at this chain of blocks, this blockchain, and cryptographically verify the processing power that it actually took you to produce those blocks. In other words, we can mathematically prove the sheer computational force that it took to forge the Bitcoin blockchain. So one potential way of attacking Bitcoin would be if you have this bad actor, this evil dude who just happens to look kind of like the Monopoly man, okay? And what he knows is that miners don't stay constantly connected to the Bitcoin network. Sometimes a mining rig needs to reboot, or it needs to be repaired or upgraded or whatever. So what he's going to do is start his own alternative fork of Bitcoin with its own alternative blockchain, and he's going to listen for requests. And so when one of these miners tries to rejoin the Bitcoin network, the legitimate network is going to offer the miner a chance to reconnect to one copy of the blockchain, but this evil dude is going to offer his fake copy. And he's going to hope that when these miners try to return to the network, they're going to choose his fake copy and accept his fake blocks and incorporate them into a new blockchain, which will allow him to make a bunch of fake Bitcoin. The easiest way for him to do that is to take an actual copy of the legitimate blockchain and then just add some of his own fake blocks onto the end of it. But the reason this isn't going to work is because when miners rejoin the network, they can look at his fake blocks and they can determine how much computational power was used to produce them. And they're going to choose the blockchain that was produced with the largest amount of computational resources. Or in other words, as miners rejoin the network, they're going to select what is known as the heaviest chain. Therefore, in order for this evil monopoly dude to succeed, he's going to need computational resources that are greater than the entire rest of the Bitcoin network. This is called a 51% attack because his processing power needs to be at least 51% of the total processing power that is currently playing the block producing game. And as we said, that's actually going to cost him a lot of money. So if we go back to proof of stake, now maybe you can see a potential problem. On the Cardano network, we don't really have miners. We just have what we call nodes. Now, nodes produce blocks, but just like miners, nodes don't stay connected to the network at all times. They sometimes go offline and come back. So if the evil monopoly dude wants to pass off a fake copy of the blockchain to a reconnecting node on the Cardano network, what's to stop him? Like I said, we aren't using high computational resources to produce the blockchain on a proof of stake network. In fact, that's exactly the opposite of what we want to do. We actually want it to be as cheap as possible because we want to save money, and so we can have a currency that we don't have to pay, $10 billion a year just to maintain, right? That was the whole idea. This is what is called the nothing at stake problem, and so far, Cardano is the only project that has proposed a solution to it that has been mathematically proven to be correct. So, how does Cardano do it, you ask? Well, there are literally peer-reviewed scientific papers, long on page count, lots of really dense language, a lot of that language being mathematical, that explains in brain-numbing detail exactly how. And since you asked, I'm going to tell you. But not to worry. I'm going to keep this as simple as possible. So first, some basics. On a proof-of-stake system, like I said, you don't have miners, you have nodes. Nodes produce the blocks and then collect any of the block rewards that would be given out. Now, anybody on the proof-of-stake network can choose a node and stake their coins to that node. The more coins that are staked to any given node, the more votes that node gets, and then the better its chances are of winning and thus being selected to produce a block. So what you actually have is a node operator who we'll call Samantha. Samantha then is supported by a pool of people who are all staking their coins on her node. If Samantha's node wins, she'll receive some of the block reward, skim some of that off the top to cover her operational costs, and then share the rest with all of the great folks who supported her with their stakes. Now remember, the point isn't to use tremendous amounts of computational power like in proof of work. Samantha is going to run a really efficient node and keep her costs as low as possible. In fact, she is strongly incentivized to do this because the lower her costs, the more of that reward she can share with her supporters. And then the more she can share, the more supporters she'll attract to her node. So the more votes she can get, and the more she'll win, and you have this whole sort of virtuous cycle. Now, Cardano uses a consensus mechanism called Ouroboros. It works like this. The task of electing block producers, again, nodes, is specified into epochs that last 5 days. Each 5-day epoch is divided up into over 1,000 slots, each slot lasting for 20 seconds. Our goal is to produce a block for each of these slots, so we're going to produce a new block every 20 seconds. So at the start of each 5-day epoch, all of the block producing nodes, called slot leaders in Cardano, are pseudo-randomly selected in a very specific order. For each slot then, a specifically chosen slot leader will produce a block, drop it into the slot, and collect a reward. And here I'm giving you an illustration of how that works. In the blue squares, we have the blocks, and in green circles, we have the slot leaders we have elected to produce each block. Each green slot leader is producing the block that I'm showing you right in front of it. The way this works, though, is that the pseudo-random selection of slot leaders is based upon a value that was generated in the previous epoch. And so during the current epoch, another random value will be generated that will be used to select the slot leaders in the next epoch. And so you have this closed loop of a system that feeds into itself, each epoch predicting the leaders of the next epoch, which is actually where the name Ouroboros comes from. Ouroboros is a mythological serpent that swallows its own tail. Okay, so how does this system solve the nothing at stake problem? To figure that out, let's go back to our evil monopoly dude. You may have noticed that earlier I said slot leaders are selected in a pseudo-random algorithm. What that really means is that although the selection will seem random at the time, we can always look back at any previous epoch, and doing some fancy math, we can figure out if the slot leaders were properly selected. So again, you have this closed loop that prevents anyone from falsely inserting a block leader. If you do it falsely, if you pick someone who you want and just insert them as the block leader, we can look back and see that you didn't properly follow the algorithm, and we can know that your chain is fake. So, what can our evil monopoly dude possibly do? Well, he has one option, basically. Like I said, he can't go back and make any changes to the slot leaders on the old chain because we'll be able to detect those changes. We'll be able to know that it's faked. Similarly to proof of work, though, what he can try to do is take the old chain and then start sticking some new blocks on the front of it. Here I'm showing that. I'm showing the old legit blocks in blue, and I'm showing the new fake blocks in red. And because this isn't proof of work, he doesn't really need a lot of computational power to do it. He can crank out new blocks on his fake chain just as fast as the blocks are being cranked out on the legit chain. The problem he faces, though, is that he still has to follow the algorithm. So to illustrate that, let's rewind and watch what he has to do. Evil Monopoly Dude is over here. He's by himself, making this fake chain. He's going to start with a legit copy of the old chain and start adding some new blocks onto the front of it. Again, I'm showing the old slot leaders as green and the old legit blocks in blue. Now, because he has to follow this pseudo-random algorithm, he's going to have to start by taking the values from the last epoch of the legit chain, and he's going to be forced to use it to select the slot leaders for the first epoch of his new chain, his evil, fake chain of super fakeness. The green circles are the legit slot leader he's forced to select. Now, he's making his own private network. He's doing all of this by himself. So nobody on the legit chain, nobody on the legit network is actually going to be around to take the assignments he's going to be forced to give them on his chain. So I'm going to show the green circles as being empty. These were the assignments that the algorithm forced him to make, but those people weren't around on his private evil network to fill those slots. So now they show up as empty slots. But hey, as far as he's concerned, that's all right, because on the Cardano network, when a selected slot leader isn't around to fill their slot, the system just rolls it over and allows you to select another slot leader based upon who is available. Our evil Monopoly Dude will, of course, make it so that on his network, only nodes under his control will be available to fill those missing slots. So we'll put his new slot leaders in, and they'll be purple circles, and then they'll produce his new blocks, shown as the red squares. The trouble he's facing, though, is that all of those empty slots will have to be recorded on his new chain. Otherwise, the algorithm won't allow him to assign his new slot leaders. He uses the empty slots to give himself permission to assign the new slot leaders. So when the legitimate nodes that have gone offline reconnect, the Cardano network will offer them a chance to reconnect to the legit chain, and the evil Monopoly Dude will offer them a chance to connect to his fake chain, hoping they'll all pick it up, and his fake transactions will ultimately be accepted by enough of the nodes to be incorporated. The trouble with that is, as these offline nodes come back online and reconnect, they can see that he has all of these missing slots on his chain that he had to fill. They'll be able to actually look back and see the point at which he started inserting his fake blocks, because right before that can happen, his chain will be marked with a bunch of these missing slots. Now, let me be clear here. You will occasionally have empty slots on the legitimate blockchain. Those actually serve a function, because sometimes legitimate nodes or the legitimate slot leaders are going to be offline. So it will record that as an empty slot. Someone else will be selected and it will be filled. But that shouldn't happen all the time. That should just happen like every now and then, okay? But when you make a fake chain and you pull away from the network, you basically have none of these slot leaders who were elected for the next epoch. So then you have lots of these empty slots. And so what Cardano calls this is the chain density. So pretty airtight, right? The only way the evil dude can actually win then is to control more than half of the nodes. If he controls more than 50%, he can follow all the rules and still validate a bunch of fake blocks, and nobody can really stop him. So that's actually the same as the case with Bitcoin in a 51% attack. Of course, to do that, he'd need to actually buy up what would probably amount to millions, if not billions of dollars worth of ADA. And again, if he's going to buy that much ADA, Does he really have the motivation to attack the network? At that point, it's really more in his financial interest just to play honestly and collect his legitimate block rewards instead of destroying the network that his multi-million-dollar stash of ADA depends upon to have any value whatsoever. One caveat here, though, is that if someone launches a successful 51% attack on a proof-of-work system, like Bitcoin, the miners can fight back by increasing their hash power, by increasing their computational resources. On a proof-of-stake network, there may arise a situation where there's no easy way for the good guys to regain control of the network because they'd need to buy more currency. But if there's a cap on that, and if the attacker already bought 51% of all the available currency, and he's not going to sell any of it back to the honest people, there's nothing that anyone can actually do about it. He now controls the network. So that's just something to consider. But here again, I'll say, if you control 51% of the network, that means you are literally the person who has the most to lose if that network fails. So you're really disincentivized at that point, I think, to attack the network. So really briefly, how does Ethereum try to solve these same problems? Ethereum's equivalent to Ouroboros is called Casper. And unlike in the Ouroboros system, where you can unstake your coins at any given time, in the Casper system, your stakes get locked up. The reason for this lockup is that because if the node you staked your coins in behaves dishonestly, your coins can be slashed. The idea is that this disincentivizes any bad actors. So like if I'm the evil dude and I control the node, the thinking goes, I don't really want to try making any fake blocks because if I'm detected, I can lose my stakes. I can directly have my coins slashed. My coins are literally at stake, okay? Now, I think there are several problems with that approach. The first is that honest parties could suffer as a result. If you, as an honest participant, stake your coins in a dishonest node, you could have your coins slashed as a consequence. You are literally putting your coins at stake and trusting in another party not to cause damages. So for that reason, I think under the Casper system, you might actually see a lot more people who decide to run their own nodes. And maybe that's the whole idea if you think about it. Another problem, though, is that by requiring people to lock their stakes up, it's going to lead to, I think, fewer people actually wanting to participate. And if fewer people participate, that means an attacker could launch an attack with a smaller amount of total stake. So without going into tons of detail in this video, the Ethereum Foundation has published a scholarly paper. They've updated it several times. We're on version 4 now. The paper formally specifies Casper, and I will be sure to link it for you in the description. In that paper, though, they refer to Casper as the friendly finality gadget. They call it a finality gadget because, as you may already know, Ethereum is currently running on a fully proof-of-work consensus mechanism. The plan for implementing Casper is based upon, at least at first, a hybrid design, where half of the system will operate under proof of work and the other half will operate under Casper, proof of stake. So in their paper, they refer to proof of work as the proposal mechanism, which will propose the blocks, and to Casper as this finality gadget, which is kind of like a safety mechanism that either finalizes the blocks or not. To me, this suggests that, as currently written, Casper isn't quite ready for prime time. It still kind of depends upon an underlying proof-of-work algorithm. Something that is also made clear in the paper, section 2.1, if you do actually decide to read it, is that under Casper, you won't even need 51% of the stakes to complete a successful attack. Instead, and again, this is according to the Ethereum Foundation, their calculations in the paper, if an attacker has even 34% of the stakes, they may be successful in an attack against Casper. Just something to consider. In contrast, according to IOHK, that's the company that's powering the development of Cardano, IOHK is claiming in peer-reviewed research that an attacker will need at least 51% of the ADA stakes in order to be successful against Ouroboros. And in fact, at this point in time, Cardano is the only proof-of-stake project that's willing to make such a bold claim. No part of Cardano will ever be proof of work, and on paper, if we just accept the claims of IOHK and the claims of the Ethereum Foundation, both at face value, Ouroboros objectively appears to be a much more secure protocol, simply by the numbers that are published by both groups. Now, in the next installment, I'm going to zoom out and talk more about the phases of Cardano development on a larger scale, including the Byron and Shelley eras. On the topic of Shelley, which does deal with staking, I'm going to zoom out and take a higher level view of what staking is actually going to look like for those of us who decide to participate. Another proof of stake project, EOS, has been in the news recently with some controversy surrounding the way they are managing their staking system on a higher level. So we're going to actually take a minute in the upcoming edition to compare Cardano and EOS on that sort of higher management level. So that's a wrap for this video. I know it was a little bit long, so thanks to all of you who stuck it out with me. I do truly hope that all you guys and gals out there in TubeLand found it to be very informative. Now, I'd love to hear what you think about this video, so at this point, let me ask you guys a few questions. 1, do you think that I was fair in my comparison of Ethereum and Cardano? Are there any important details you think that I left out? 2, do you share my concerns about the eventuality of Bitcoin in proof of work? As always, comments are actively encouraged, especially if anything I covered wasn't clear or if it got you to thinking and now you have some thoughts and you have some questions. Please share your thoughts. Please ask your questions. I will be so pleased and very happy to get back to you. And as always, if you're feeling down, Charlie Brown, take a closer look and turn the tables around.